Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back with another video, and this is going to be yet another episode of the LEGO Star Wars MOC Showcase. We have some insane MOCs to look at today, but before we get into that, I do just quickly want to say, if there's one thing that you take away from the video today, please go ahead to the description and support the creators of these beautiful MOCs. I know they will greatly appreciate it. To kick things off, we're first going to look at a MOC titled Rick the Door Technician by WG Productions, and I'm sure you fans of Jedi Survivor are going to appreciate this one. This is not a big MOC by any means, but I think it exemplifies the types of details and just small little things that you can do to what would ordinarily be a pretty simple surface in order to make a MOC just look that much more nice and take it to the next level. So the construction of this is pretty straightforward. There's basically two walls and then two minifigures in front of it. I think the thing that popped to me the most about this MOC is just that slanted wall, which I think makes a really big difference. I think that, you know, we could have easily just put a straight flat wall there and kept it moving, but the fact that that wall is angled actually, I think, really makes a big difference for this MOC, especially with that light fixture texture on the inside of the wall. That's something that even I've kind of struggled with to kind of replicate in LEGO. It's not the most obvious thing, but I do love the technique that he used here, basically just using tiles on the outside of the wall and then stacking up those 1x1 or 1x2 plates on the inside to give you that light texture on the inside. And a similar thing is actually happening with the wall on the left side of the MOC, but it is not angled. The next thing I'd love to take notice to are just the small little details that he has implemented, not only onto the surface of the wall, but also on the top of it. I think that ingots used either in this flat position or also used on their sides are a nice way to give a wall some detail. He also even using, looks like a masonry brick here to give just an extra bit of detail into the wall, and also just some brackets built into the wall to just make the wall look a little bit more textured, a little bit more interesting. And those are the types of things I like to see, and I think those are easy ways for builders to use what are pretty common parts in creative ways to make their just builds look a little bit more interesting. Know anything about this scene in the game, then I think it's quite humorous that he was able to replicate it. And I do also like the detail he added to the stun baton of the Scout Trooper, how he used that like blue energy blast piece on the end of that clip. Overall, I think this is just a nice little vignette that I think any fan of the game would get a kick out of. The next build is absolutely adorable, and it is built by OK Yaramanoglu. It is titled Boga the Varacto, and when I saw this thing, I instantly fell in love with it. This is such a cool looking build. This is a minifig scale Boga, the creature that Obi-Wan rides on in episode 3. And I just love the way he recreated it. There's some pretty awesome parts usage all throughout this thing. Some of the things that I think are highlights are the use of those Ninjago boomerang pieces at the end of the tail. Also like the brown hot dog as kind of the handle of the reins on the Boga. He's using those palm tree leaves on the back of the head to represent some of the feathering that we see. I think the blue clips with those angled curved slopes, as well as that 1x1 tooth piece in front of it, just adds for a nice pop of color, and this is just a really cool looking build. One thing I did want to show you guys, the builder actually posted a reference photo, and it's kind of awesome just how seamless the transition between these two are. Like seeing one of these photos, like the actual Boga, and then looking at it back to back with this photo is just absolutely awesome. I don't know if he has instructions for this thing, but this is something I could see myself either getting the instructions for or trying to reverse engineer just to have in my own collection. I'm often pretty big on team hashtag molded animals, or when it comes to like Lego Star Wars especially. But I think if Lego were to redo, for example, that old speeder bike set, and this was the kind of Boga that they were able to include in the set, I think I'd actually be quite happy with it, and I would probably display this. Two things I think also are really cool on this build are the dark green car fender pieces for Boga's shoulders, so to speak, and also those olive green leaf pieces for his cute little feet. And the next build we have today is by Darth Bjorn, who is, at this point, a regular here on the LEGO Star Wars MOC Showcase. His build is called Suitors on Borgo Prime. This is another one of those Star Wars factions, also known as like Star Wars RPG type builds with a pretty interesting story to go along with it. If that's any extra incentive for you guys to check out the links in the description, go to his Flickr, and then see what's going on behind the scenes of this build. Yeah, this thing is just so visually appealing. I'm always a big fan of these, what I would kind of say Coruscant inspired builds. It isn't necessarily Coruscant, but I think the like hollow signs that we see throughout the build very much reminds me of Coruscant. So if you do a build like this, that is almost a surefire way to get on the LEGO Star Wars MOC Showcase. So what can we talk about first? Well, I think the thing that attracted me most to this build is the color. I think there's some nice splotches of color all throughout this thing. So obviously the base of it is dark gray and light gray, which is pretty par for the course when it comes to Star Wars builds. But that big hollow sign, which once again is in what I'd imagine to be Arabic. So those Arabic speakers in the chat, go ahead, decode this, let me know what it is. It looks really cool. I love how it's constructed with exclusively trans blue pieces, as well as that big sword on top to give it a little bit more detail. There's also some graffiti, it looks like, behind the balcony over to the right with orange and yellow pieces. It looks like the sign right above the building has been digitally added to this photo, which I don't really have a problem with at all on that trans orange piece. So outside of the hollow signs, there's also a good bit of dark orange in this build, which actually looks pretty nice. On the left side of the build, we can see there's like an opening, kind of like the building has been broken into or destroyed somehow, which I think also just kind of gives it that lived-in aesthetic, that thing that, you know, a lot of people attribute to the Star Wars design that makes everything look so cool. The fact that it looks like, you know, there's a story behind the architecture, the fact that it's not all pristine, but instead damaged and weathered in some way, I think makes it look that much more interesting. I also do very much appreciate the design at the top of this building. I believe in the description of the build, it's called it's like a ventilation system of some sort, because there's actually a hut who resides within that building, but having that like radial pattern with those little structures that kind of spring out from the middle, I think looks really cool. This wouldn't be a LEGO Star Wars MOC Showcase episode without a mention of the cargo crates. There are some really fun designs. One of the ones I thought was pretty interesting is up front here, using those rocket pieces back to back to make a nice little cargo crate. I think that looks really cool. He's also using those wand boxes with, I want to say, like a 1x3 tile that was in the Justifier set, if I'm not mistaken. This orange cargo crate over here, I am a big fan of, and also like these two circular cargo crates towards the back, which is kind of like the last episode, but another creative use of the steering wheel piece right on top of that, connected to the bottom side of a turntable top. This next photo gives us an overhead look and a better look at the ground details, and there's a good amount of ground details to be appreciated in this build. The one that really sticks out to me is this detail right here. I honestly do not know what this piece even is, so I don't know, someone who's smarter than me in the comment section was to drop that in the comment section. I would very much appreciate that, because I think it makes for a pretty interesting looking ground detail. I also like the use of these gate pieces right here as part of the ground detail as well. Another thing that makes the ground look really cool, and something that I think a lot of people can incorporate into a build just to, you know, once again take your ground to another level, are these pipe pieces. I think having these integrated into the ground, especially having them curve as well, I think that is a nice little way to just make your ground just that much more interesting. And then finally, I did want to pay some attention to the minifigures included in this build. None of these figures are just, you know, exclusively Star Wars minifigures that would come right out of the box. In fact, all of these seem like fig barfs of some sort, but I love this. I love this because it's super inspiring, and it's a way to, you know, if you want to make a Star Wars build that doesn't include any main characters or people that are recognizable, there are so many different ways and elements you can add to figures that can just make them look detailed, but also make them look unique, yet still look like something that belongs in the Star Wars universe. So one of my favorites is this tall Forlom looking guy over to the left. I think he looks pretty cool. There's also this guy with I think Wrecker's like armor. I do have to say my favorite figure included in this though is this Constable Zuvio looking guy up here on the balcony. That just looks freaking awesome. I love the 3x3 dish on his head, as well as the rebreather around his neck. Like, that is just a really cool, interesting looking figure, but like I said, it definitely looks like it belongs in a Star Wars MOC. So Darth Bjorn, you've done it again, man. Keep up the awesome work. I very much appreciate being able to show off your builds on the MOC Showcase. And now finally, our big build of the day is one of the most impressive things I've seen in quite some time. It is a minifigure scale Gazanti class cruiser, and it is by JF on Flickr. Oh boy, where do I even begin with this thing? So one, I mean, you have to take notice of the fact that he built it rigid enough to be basically elevated on what I would assume is some sort of metal support. and that is just on another level. Honestly, this thing is massive. You can just tell by the shape of it and by the the minifig scale TIE fighters that are connected to it on the underside. So that is just insane right off the bat, that it just has enough structural integrity to be able to be mounted by that pretty thin bar. Outside of the ship, I did want to mention that I love the platform that he built for this with the Imperial insignia as well as those stripes below it. I think that was a really nice, interesting thing to do to, I guess, hide whatever is below this thing that it's mounted to, but then also just give you something interesting to look at below it. I like when builders really do take pride in the presentation of their MOCs, and I think this certainly does do that. The next photo gives us a better look at the back of this Gazanti, and I very much appreciate the shaping on the engines. I think it looks really, really good, especially the back with how those curved sections are all slanted and come together. One thing that I do really like about this build, and it kind of surprised myself because typically I'm very much against studs when it comes to builds. I'm sure if you look at anything I build, you can tell I'm not the biggest fan of studs. I try to hide them wherever I can. However, with this build, I feel like he was really deliberate where he placed the studs and actually used them effectively to kind of represent maybe separations in paneling on the build or just represent panels in themselves. And I kind of like that. I think it actually does very much work for this build. Would I prefer if it were completely clean? Probably. But I do think that he used studs in enough of a deliberate way to where it actually kind of works for the pattern of the build and makes it just look a little bit more textured, which is actually really cool. Next photo shows the Gazanti landed without the TIE fighters attached to the bottom of it. And here you can even see it has some landing gear. As for whether or not those landing gears are functional, it actually does look like it. It looks like, you know, those tubes that the TIEs are connected to are actually kind of elevated from the ground. The entire ship is elevated and it's just sitting on those landing gears, which is actually pretty cool. Here we have a better look at the back of the ship, and I think you can once again just get an appreciation for all the angles that are included in this build. The Gazanti is more or less a pretty boxy looking vehicle, but I think that he really took a lot of pride and effort into representing just all those subtle angles that would be present in the Gazanti if you took enough time to try to notice them. I'm also very much a big fan of how this cone was integrated into the rear section here. It makes me so happy to see this build finally completed. I've actually been following it on Flickr for quite some time, so I did want to show you guys some progress pictures that he had posted a while back. Here's one of the underside of the build, and then here's another of, I guess, you know, the rendering of him building it digitally before it actually manifested itself in real life. I do have to say, like, it is a really big deal for me to be showing this build off and also talking about it so positively. If anyone knows me, you know I have not really been a fan of the Gazanti design at all. It's just one of those vehicles that I don't really like the design of in Star Wars. But I'm not gonna lie, this Gazanti has me feeling some type of way. I think seeing it in minifig scale is an impressive feat on its own, but then also having the TIE fighters attached to the underside and having those be minifig scale as well, I think it just makes this one of those next level builds, and it definitely deserves a lot more recognition than I feel it's been getting. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is a fantastic build, and I hope we see more people attempt these larger scale ships at minifig scale. Kind of makes me feel like I need to do my part and contribute to large scale minifig scale ships. So I don't know, we'll see what the future holds.